Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to the first episode of Middle Grade Ninja for 2023. We're starting it off right with Roseanne A. Brown. I'm still here. I'm still your host, Rob Kent, author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. And you know what? In 2023, Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees is still available as an audiobook, a paperback, and the ebook. Oh, esteemed audience, the ebook is still free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. So get your hands on that for free. Start your new year off right, and then come back with cash money for Banneker Bones and the Alligator People and Banneker Bones and the Cyborg Conspiracy. You're going to have a great time. I've also, under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, written some novels for older readers. For more information about those, and more importantly, for thousands of interviews with literary agents, editors, authors, book people, the world's best people, head to middlegradeninja.com. So here we go, setting the tone for all of 2023. Roseanne A. Brown, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Rob. Thank you so much for having me.
I am thrilled to chat with you. I've got all kinds of questions. The esteemed audience knows that I never torture my guests by making them sit through me summarizing either their background or their book. Why would I make you do that when you're right here and could do a better job of it than I can? So if you would give esteemed audience an overview of your background, and we'll go from there.
Gotcha. Well, my name is Roseanne A. Brown, but I like to say the only people who call me Roseanne are publishing people and my doctor, because everyone called me Rosie. Not even my mom called me Roseanne, so feel free to call me Rosie. And I am the author of several young adult and middle grade sci-fi fantasy novels. My first series, A Song of Wraith and Ruin, was a New York Times bestseller, but my most recent one, and the one I think your audience wants to hear about the most, is SERWA, BOATENG'S Guide to Vampire Hunting, which came out September of 2022 with Rick Riordan Presents. And I like to describe that book as kind of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer meets Mean Girls, because it follows a young vampire hunter named SERWA, who has trained her whole life to fight Ajay, which are these like vampires that can turn into fireflies and take over people's minds. So like they're scary. However, one day a hunt goes horribly wrong and her parents are like, yeah, you're done. You cannot do this anymore. So they dump her in the middle of nowhere, Maryland, with some non-magic relatives while they go finish the hunt. So she has to face her toughest battle yet, middle school. So a girl who's trained to only fight monsters and punch vampires in the face has to learn to use that knowledge to survive your average American middle school with all the cliques and where do I sit at lunch? And as you can probably guess, it goes horribly.
Yeah, I think I'll take the vampires.
Yeah, middle school is the worst. I don't know about you, but I hated middle school. If you're in middle school and you're reading this, it's not that bad. But if you were in middle school in the past, you know what I'm talking about.
It's a good thing to be on the other side of. I think seventh grade, of all my years in school, I think seventh grade was probably the hardest.
Yes, there's just something about like that 12, like that seventh grade year. Like you're going through so much, like personally. A lot of kids have like finally hit puberty there, so you have all the weird emotions going on. And there's just something about that year, because having both been a seventh grader and taught seventh grade, something about it's like a black hole of weird feelings for everyone involved, teachers and students.
I remember I was still very childish, although that doesn't say much. So I've got Batman action figures behind me as we record this, still a little bit childish. But so I still had a lot of my, I still watched cartoons. I still went home and actually played with the Batman action figures as opposed to putting them on the shelf. But then I also had these new adult thoughts. I was more aware of just the state of the world. I started paying attention to the news and looking around. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have to live here. Oh wow.
I think I was similar, because I was also super nerdy, because around that age is when I started getting to Batman and comics as well. But my big, really embarrassing, what I was up to in seventh grade, I was really into role play. Like I had an account online where I could like role play like South Park with my friends, like Neopets and like all that stuff. So I was unfortunately that kid.
And you're I mean this in the most complimentary way possible, but you're kind of a big nerd, right? You love Batman and Star Wars and all the good stuff, yeah?
It's very true. It is very true. Thank you. I have always been a nerd. I love pop culture. Even SERWA, like sort of my driving force with every book, I kind of have a vibe and a tone in mind. Like not even just the content of the story itself, but like what sort of energy do I want the book to get off? Like with my first series, I wanted to give up sort of like a fairy tale, folk tale feeling, right? But this one with SERWA, I was like, I want this to feel like a Saturday morning cartoon. Because I don't know about you, I have so many amazing memories of like waking up at 8 in the morning, like still in my PJs, grabbing a bowl of cereal. I'm watching like Yu-Gi-Oh, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Transformers, and like just that high action, high quip, go, go, go energy. I wanted the book to feel like that, but in book form.
And by the way, I should point out, I am also a huge nerd. We are in good company.
Nerds rule the world. Hey.
There was a game that came out a little bit last year for you, esteemed audience, this year for us. And a new thing I've been trying to introduce is saying what date we record this, because some of these end up going so late and then we won't comment on current events because, we have no idea what's going to be current by the time this goes up. We are chatting November 9th. The day before I've got my ticket to see Wakanda Forever, still waiting to figure out what the heck happened with the midterm elections. I think it's good. We'll see. Have you seen, I know you wrote the Shuri graphic novel, but do you get to go see Wakanda Forever ahead of the general populace, or are you waiting for tomorrow also?
So certain Black Panther authors were invited to the premieres, and they're all lovely people. I love them a lot. I was not one of them, and it's something I've made my peace with. Imagine a single tear running down my face right now. But all that to say, no, while there were Black Panther authors at the premiere, I was not one of them. So I have tickets for the 10th as well with my friends. November 10th, that is.
If it makes you feel any better, my friend and former guest Maurice Broaddus is also a Black Panther author who did not get the invitation. So he'll be seeing it tomorrow with the rest of us.
I'm hearing really good things, I feel like Marvel and the whole team understands there's so much on this movie. Like obviously what Black Panther did when it first came out, but in the wake of Chadwick's death, like I really feel like, because I used to love the MCU, but the last couple offerings, like I just feel like it has lost its kind of direction. And so I'm really curious to see with this movie, like knowing what it represents, what it's going to mean. I feel like they're really in a place to do something amazing we haven't seen the MCU ever, actually.
I'm hopeful. We'll see what we'll see. I thought Spider-Man, the most recent, all the Spider-Mans, that was good stuff. I like Multiverse of Madness, not as a Marvel film. Like as a Doctor Strange film, it was fine, but as an Evil Dead 4, it was fantastic as an Evil Dead movie.
I love the visuals of that. I will say that I love that they let Sam, I never say his name right, Sam Raimi, is that how you say it?
I think it's Raimi, but I'm not 100%.
Raimi, okay. The other Spider-Man guy. They let Sam like really tap into his horror roots. And so I thought visually, it was probably one of the most visually interesting ones we've gotten in a long time. But I still feel like it just didn't come together quite as tightly as I would have liked. And I can't get started on Thor Love and Thunder because we will be here for 4 hours. But I love Taika Waititi. I love Ragnarok, but Thor Love and Thunder just it missed too many beats for me.
I didn't finish that one. I was really enjoying Christian Bale eating the scenery as a great villain. But I don't know. I got involved. I got an email or something. I was watching at home and it's like, I'll pause and I'll come back. And I haven't. And that was like a month ago. So
see, that is a bad sign. Like if you had been really invested deep into it, you would have been like, hang on, inbox, I am watching this movie. Just wait. So the fact you're able to step away and not come back, that says a lot.
But yeah, no, it did not grab my attention, but hopefully Wakanda Forever is going to be something amazing. I'm hopeful that a Lego set assures me that it's probably going to be Shuri in the new Black Panther suit. We'll see what happens, but I feel like that's because Nakia is going to be at some point probably a villain, maybe movie 3 or so, right?
I think so. I think that's her trajectory in the comics. So but they've also changed so much from the comics already. So who knows?
I tell you, in an ideal universe, and they won't do this, but I would love to see Killmonger step through a portal. Like, hey, I'm from another universe where I'm actually good, and now I can just be the hero. Like, fantastic!
That would be great. I'm actually really curious. One thing I'm excited about the MCU, like how they're going to use the variants. Like, I guess like spoilers for Loki, but like they've introduced the idea that there's different variants of every person in the multiverse, right? And so people are saying they could use that to like bring back T'Challa and all that stuff. And I'm low-key hoping they don't do that because I feel like that, like I get why audiences want that. Obviously, we want our hero back, but I feel like within this story world, if they start using variants to bring back dead characters, then death is going to lose all its meaning on the story level. And so I'm like, ooh, let's maybe not do that.
Oh, you can come through with the new Tony Stark and the new Steve Rogers, and let's just have a whole new generation.
Yes, the Young Avengers. I think they're setting up for the Young Avengers though, because we already have Miss America, we have Wiccan, we have some Kate Bishop in the Hawkeye show, and a whole bunch of other ones. We have Young Loki. So I think what they're setting up is Young Avengers, which I'm really excited for because that's one of my favorite series.
Well, that would be good. Just get some less familiar heroes front and center for a little while, and then do the inevitable reboot later.
Yep, 100%.
So, but I was such a big fan of Killmonger in the first film. I was like, if he didn't kill so many people, I'm with him. Like, this is a good idea. Stop killing folks, and you'll be great.
Yeah, and you could very much tell like they ran into the problem where like Killmonger was making too much sense. So they were also just like, let's just make him genocidal and they'll throw it off. And it's like, okay, yeah, like we can't root for him now, but like his core ideas aren't actually that bad.
So if he comes through for another universe, like in my universe, I never killed anybody. Oh, great. Come join our superhero squad.
I was like, yeah, Michael B. Jordan, we're with you. Yeah.
Although I thought he was going to be Superman, but that might have been 2 or 3 iterations of the DC universe ago. I don't know where that's at now.
It sounds like Henry Cavill's actually going to be back because it sounds like DC, if whatever is going on with Warner Brothers HBO, do not know. But did you see the announcement James Gunn is taking over the DCEU? Yeah, and it sounds like, especially because Henry Cavill has now exited The Witcher, that he might actually be coming back for Man of Steel, let me rephrase that. It sounds like Henry Cavill might be coming back to do Superman again because I have not seen Black Adam, but what I'm hearing are hints that there are strong suggestions that Henry Cavill's Superman still exists in this universe as of Black Adam.
I haven't seen the movie. I've seen the 30 seconds that Henry Cavill's in because somebody tweeted it out and was like, oh, great, you saved me the trouble of buying a ticket. Oh, I appreciate it.
Yeah, and it breaks my heart because like actually growing up, even though I've written for Marvel, I was a DC person growing up. Like I got my start with like the Bat family, specifically Stephanie Brown's like first Batgirl run, the Batman and Robin run with Damian and Bruce, with like Patrick Gleason, I believe was the writer, Under the Red Hood. Like those were my entryway points, right? And so I love DC. And so every time I'm like, DC, can you just get it together? Because like you have so many amazing stories. The TV shows were on a good run for a little while. Like Flash for like 3 seasons made sense, and then of course Arrow and all that. But that's kind of come to a natural end. And the movies, I loved Wonder Woman, loved Aquaman, loved Shazam, but it just feels like no. And I love the new Batman with R-Pads because I did not think R-Pads Batman would work, but it worked for me. I was very happy for that. But I'm just like, DC, please, I know you have the capacity to pull this together.
Well, I'm hopeful because it's James Gunn that's in charge that he'll remember Zack Snyder and he used to be pals, and we'll get Zack Snyder's Justice League too. And Joss Whedon will just be crying someplace, which fine, just cry forever. I'm fine with that. Bring Zack Snyder back. Yeah. But even within that, because we're still going to have our Pattinson Batman and Ben Affleck Batman and probably some Batman on television, like there's room for all of that. We can accept those multiple Batmen. We could have multiple Supermans, whatever. We will, because we've got the fellow on Superman and Lois, whatever his name is, and then we'll have Henry Cavill. We'll also have Michael B. Jordan as a Superman. There's room for all of them.
Definitely. And also the Lois, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but the Lois and Lane one is Tyler Hoechlin. I'm probably saying your name wrong. I know that because he's in Teen Wolf, and I love Teen Wolf. He was in Teen Wolf.
He's fantastic as Superman. I'm not caught up on the second season yet, but I thought the first season was mostly fun. The end was a little bit what happened there, but prior to that, I was having a good time.
I haven't actually watched the show. I just follow what Tyler is up to.
What? I've got all kinds of questions for you about some of the IP you've been able to work with. So it's good that we have established our nerd bona fides before we dig in and we start talking about Star Wars and Shuri and all the good stuff you've done. But I want to go back and I want to talk a little bit about you because in addition to being going through the awkward transition we all go through in middle school, you came from Ghana, correct? And you did not speak English initially. What age were you when you came?
I was around 3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I was really young, but I always tell people like I don't necessarily remember the exact like coming over from Ghana, but I remember the sensation of change because even 3 is old enough to like you can tell something has very shifted in your life, and a bigger shift is moving to a new continent, to a place where most of the people don't look like you and they don't speak your language. Like I remember that. And when we first got here, I struggled. I did not speak English, and I didn't speak it for our first several years there. Like I got there 3 up to like first grade, second grade. I was really struggling with English.
Okay. I love a great
Mm.
success story when you're not speaking the language and now you're publishing multiple novels in the language. You are a master of letters in the language. So when I know reading was instrumental for you to learn the language, correct? So about when are we talking that reading? What kind of books are you reading, and how does that help?
Got it. So I actually remember the exact moment things started switching. It was around second grade, and at this point, like things were going bad. Like teachers were calling my parents, and like she does not understand what's going on. We might have to hold her back, and like no one wants to be held back. Like first grade, second grade, that's embarrassing. And so my parents were like, really, like we don't know what to do. And I remember we were at BJ's, right? For those who don't know, BJ's is kind of like a Costco like big bulk store. And there was this like stuffed dog I really wanted, right? And I was there with my mom. And so in my native language, I was like, Mom, me pet that dog way, me pet that dog way, which basically means like, I want that dog, I want that dog. My mom says to me, like in her native language, she's like, okay, if you want the dog, I want you to go to the book table, pick up one of the books in English and read it all the way through. And then if you can tell me what's about, next time we come back to BJ's, I'll buy you the dog. And I remember being like, ugh, okay, mom, and like storm over to the table. And the first book, I just grabbed the first book I saw. I wasn't even thinking. And the book turned out to be Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And I want to pause and say that I do not agree with the author's current transphobia or bigotry at all. And I'm very, very against like a lot of the rhetoric that's been coming out. But with the book itself, Harry Potter itself, that it just opened my eyes to wow, like this, you can put words on a page and it'll create worlds in people's minds. I was just hooked from there on. Like I think I read that whole book in like 3 days, which at the time, like as someone who cannot speak English, like that is very, very fast. And at like 8, that's a very fast time to read like a book. And I just kept going and going from there. And do you know, I actually never got that stuffed dog. And I told my mom, yeah. And I told my mom about this like a couple years ago when I started remembering the story. And she's like, oh, you got something better. You are now an author. And I'm like, no, I didn't. You owe me a dog. So that is a current point of contention in our relationship that comes up every now and then. Because I feel like she's honor bound to get me that stuffed dog. I might be in my late 20s, but I deserve it. So,
Well, use all those sweet royalties coming in from the books and go get yourself a dog, right?
but it's just the honor thing. Like, yes, I could go buy myself one now, but it's not. She promised it to me, so she needs to go buy. That's the whole thing. Like, it's the honor of she buying it because I fulfilled her challenge. Like, I don't even know if they make that dog anymore or if that like BJ's is even still there, but it's the honor. It's the principle of the matter at this point.
Well, she better find it. If she has to hop on eBay and take a vintage stuffed dog to BJ's to rebuy it there, by God, contract must be fulfilled.
Thank you. Someone understands. Thank you.
I have zero power. Your mother has never met me. She won't listen to me. But if she listens to the show, you know what you need to do.
also all very true.
So you go on and you read all of the Harry Potters, and then from there read everything else, or?
Yeah, at the time when I started, I think they were on Goblet of Fire because I remember not being aware of the releases before, which sounds wild to anyone in the 2000s because like how are you not aware of Harry Potter happening? But I was just like, again, I barely understood English at all. I'm just like, I got no idea what these people are saying. But after that, yeah, I remember being really excited when Order of the Phoenix dropped. And then some other favorites from that age, from that time in my life, A Series of Unfortunate Events. Adored that series. Gail Carson Levine, like everything she wrote, particularly Ella Enchanted, and also David Knight, which was also one of the first books I ever read that had like a Black girl as like major character in a non-racist way. And I remember like at that young age being like, oh my goodness, like it just blew my mind. I'm like, you can write about Black characters as bad as it sounds. Like that was just not something that was prevalent in the early 2000s in a mainstream and also not very bigoted way. and another one, oh, Cornelia Funke, like Inkheart, what's it called? The the Thief Lord, or Cornelia Funke, Inkheart and Thief Lord, two of my absolute favorite. Like I was just gravitated very heavily towards fantasy from a young age.
So when does it occur to you that, hey, somebody writes these books, maybe that could be me?
I think I always low key kind of wanted to do it. It was around high school. I read The False Prince by Jennifer Nielsen, which to this day, still one of, not even just middle grade, one of my favorite books of all time, because it's one of those books like if you tell people what's about, you will ruin the book, so you can't. I remember when I got to that ending, and I was like, "Oh my goodness!" I was, my brain was blown. I just did not know what to do. I'm like sitting there in the high school media center screaming to myself, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I want to write a book that makes someone feel like this. Like I want to invoke this emotion in someone else." And from there, I kind of started seriously, like I'd written sort of short stories and like fan fiction before, but I really started seriously trying to write original fiction from then on.
So you start with fan fiction. When do you start writing your first book?
So I started writing my first book in 2016. So in spring of 2016, I was a junior in college. I went to the University of Maryland at the time. And I remember the exact moment I got the idea for that book as well, because one of the big themes of the book is sort of mental health, right? And that was the year of my life I really started taking my own mental health very seriously. And I went to a therapist for the first time. And I remember I was walking back from my like counselor, my very first meeting with her, back to my dorm. I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, if a ghost tried to possess me right now, it would be like, ooh, you got like a lot going on in there. Like, I don't want to deal with this. Like, you can have this back. Like, this is too much for me to possess. And it sounds funny now, but it really got me thinking about the intersection of mental illness and fantasy, and how oftentimes we'll see it'll be like a metaphor. Like think Elsa in Frozen, how a lot of people read her powers as a metaphor for anxiety. When she gets anxious, the ice blows up or something. Um, or it'll be like demonized, like the villain is the crazy one, or like they're seeing hallucinations or that kind of thing, right? And so I wanted to write a story that took sort of mental health, mental illness very literally, very much in the way we understand it, and also had magic side by side. And neither one is a metaphor or meant to substitute the other, but they sort of inform the other. And that became the catalyst for my main character, Malik, who has these magic powers. He can sort of see spirits and things, and he also has a generalized anxiety disorder. And the story just kind of snowballed from there.
And I know that while you're at the University of Maryland, you complete is it the Jimenez-Porter Writers House program?
Oh, that's Jimenez-Porter Writers House program.
Gotcha. So that at that point, you're all in. You're like, I love writing so much, I want to make this a career, or are you just putting a toe in the water? Where are you at that point?
So I went to school. I actually have a bachelor's in multi-platform journalism, because when I was going into, even though I knew I loved writing, creative writing, going into college, I was still very much like, this is not something you do full time if you're not Stephen King mindset. But I also knew it was my best skill, and I had been on the newspaper club when I was in high school. And so, and I really still, even though I'm not a journalist at the moment, I still really have a lot of respect for journalism and enjoyed it. So my plan had been do journalism, like sort of journalistic writing as my main job, and then creative writing on the side. Excuse me, sorry. And so what was great about the Jimenez-Porter Writers House program at UMD is that it's a living learning program, which means it's a dorm sort of dedicated to one sort of track or like genre. We also had a global studies living learning program for people interested in international relations, and one based on languages. So where people lived in the dorm and you only spoke, like if you were in the German cluster, you could only speak German when you're in their dorm, like things like that, right? And so the writers house one was for writers. And so we lived in the dorm and we took a writing workshop. And so you were both living with and working with other writers on top of your actual degree you were doing. Because I actually tried to get a creative writing minor in my school. I remember when I called the school's English department, a lady there, she was like very dismissive, and she's like, "Oh, you don't want to do this. I don't know if you can add that to your course," blah, blah, blah. And I was just so discouraged. Like I'd never got it. And so I actually never ended up getting a official creative writing minor or degree or anything, because she dissuaded me from it. And I'm so grateful that Writers House was there, and they were such an encouraging environment, because I had my first two stories published while I was in Writers House. And then later on, yeah, I started Rape while I was there, and that sold a year after I graduated. So without that encouraging environment that we sort of lived and breathed writing there in the writers' house, I don't think I'd be here right now.
Get a bunch of writers together to live together, breathe, eat, talk writing all the time. That's either the world's most brilliant idea or just a terrible idea, but it sounds like it was good.
Well, let me put it like this. So I lived there all 4 years because the program is 2 years. So I did 2 years. And then when I became an RA, my last 2 years, they liked me so much, they asked me to be the RA for that building. So even though I was no longer officially in the program anymore, I still lived in the building. And so I was a big part of like volunteering for events and helping out. And then the last year I was the teaching assistant for they had, at the time they had 3 tracks. They had fiction track, poetry track, and screenwriting track. So I was the TA for the fiction track my senior year. So I was there all 4 years and we had some drama because a bunch of writers living together, like seeing each other 24/7. Right, we have big emotions, writers, and we had some blow-ups, like especially my class of 2015. Shout out if you're listening to this. At the time, the director was named Jonna Schmidt, and she's dear friend of mine. I love her. She was like, "Yeah, your class. There was something about your group. I've never seen so many people get in a fight over Hemingway at once." Like,
well, I guess if there is a writer who would appreciate you brawling over them, it would probably be Hemingway. That tracks.
definitely, because it was very much a situation like we were all so passionate and we all had these big, strong opinions. And I was like, in my cohort, I was the youngest person. I was the only freshman because historically, Writers House takes people from sophomore year up. But the director, Jonna, she had recruited me when I was actually still in high school. I had been accepted to UMD, but I had not started there yet. So I was there at one of those like pre-freshman visit days where you come and like you talk to people and talk to programs. And she was displaying there. And I talked to her like, yeah, I'm interested in writing and all that stuff. And she's like, oh my goodness, like send an application. I know you're not officially enrolled yet, but like if we like your stuff, like let's see what we can do. And so she enrolled me. And I believe I was the first freshman they actually enrolled in the program, like from their first year there. I was in Writers House. And then later on, it's now more common, but so I was also the youngest person in my group. I was only one of 4 women. There's the woman to man ratio was a lot more skewed back then. This was 2013 when I started. And then also I was only one of a couple people of color in my class as well. So it was very much like very aware that I was sort of in the minority in a lot of different ways. And so there was very much that feeling like people look at me and they're like, what is this freshman doing here? Like seniors, like all this. And I'm just like, that feeling like I have to prove that I am actually as good to be here with the rest of y'all as Jonna saw in me when I was just like a high schooler.
So that is putting, I don't think there's a way to put a positive spin on that because it's your experience, but I assume that puts a lot of pressure on you to work harder, to be the exceptional in every. Sounds like you hit every category of exception for the program you could be.
Definitely, yeah, and I was definitely much like I was very likely like she saw spark, and she's the director of the program herself. So like she saw spark there and she opened that door. But I was very much like I have to make this worth it, and so I definitely pushed myself a lot and like I went hard at it from the beginning, like putting in my stories and really going hard at it. And I know some of the I'm looking back, like some of those guys I was having the most fights with, like we're actually good friends now, and they're just like, yeah, Rosie, we're definitely like we don't know who this girl is. Like you seemed like a child at the time, but like no, you had the juice. And I was like, yes, I had the juice.
I'd like to think that, and the numbers will prove me wrong on this, but I like to think that in other industries, being the only person of color, being the only woman, it's going to be rough no matter what you do. I like to imagine that if you're with writers and creatives, it's a little bit easier than it would be otherwise. But of course, if that were true, we'd be seeing better numbers of representation within mainstream publishing, which we're not seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely depends. Like certain corners of publishing are better at it than others. Like Kid Lit in particular, middle grade and YA, because there was such a big, like obviously authors of color, marginalized authors, we have been here since the beginning, right? But we really saw something start to shift in like the early 2010s with the real rise of like people really pushing for diversity, the rise of the We Need Diverse Books movement and what that organization has done. And I feel like so much intentional grassroots work was there done by authors and booksellers and teachers that it's a little bit better in these spaces, but Writers House, and I was in Writers House at the time, so I was seeing this happen in YA, online YA, and then, however, in literary spaces, because that was what Writers House was very focused on, literary writing. There was a lot of like, for a while, they're like, "Do we going to add a genre class, like one that just focuses on science fiction, fantasy, and all that?" Because they didn't have it when I was officially there, and I think they eventually ended up adding it, but there was still that air that like, oh, things like children's literature, fantasy, sci-fi, it's not real writing. And I find in those more sort of spaces that are a little less, oh, in those spaces that are a little more traditional in their ways of thinking of what literature looks like, we are still seeing a lot of those old ways of thinking flourish.
Well, traditionally, another word for that would be historically, and historically, we don't have a good track record. So maybe
Exactly.
historically, traditionally, start a little something new, which I know you're a big advocate of, shaking up the canon, getting new books within schools, new books for students for a new time, right?
Yeah, 100%. Mostly because like there are so many, like there are some classics I love out there. Like I'm a big fan of Great Gatsby, love that man. But I just feel like, especially with younger readers, it is so important to have books that they can really connect to and see themselves in. And it wasn't until like I, as a younger, like my understanding of literature started to change when I actually started being given books by Black authors and with Black characters in them. And that did not really happen until high school. And there's so many kids out there who think they don't like reading just because they don't see reading as something being for them. Like they see it as like honestly a bunch of old dead white guys, right? And so like you're a young immigrant kid who don't speak English, like your family just does not have like a lot of money, and like you're just like, but why am I doing this? How does this apply to my life? What is there here that like connects with me? And of course we all know anyone can read a book about anything and anyone and connect. But at that young age, when we're still trying to build that foundation and that love of reading, that love of understanding, it is so necessary, because it also tells them when we don't have books about young marginalized kids, like a society writes about what we feel matters, and not just writes, but publishes, celebrates, brings forward what we believe matters. So when we only do it about a certain group, what we are passively reinforcing is this idea, this group matters enough to be immortalized in our stories and no one else. Like this is what our society cherishes and our society that believes is the center. When you get that at a young age, you understand that, like, even if you don't consciously realize you understand that. So you're like, if this is what's going to be celebrated, if these are the experiences that matter to society, why should I care? Like, why no one then cares about what is happening to me. My experience is not meant to be known or seen, if that makes sense.
No, I think that's very, very well put. And why, why get involved if they very obviously don't want you?
Mm-hmm.
Go find some place that does.
Exactly.
That's changing. It's changing. Hopefully, it's changing. All right, because you're out there publishing. I'm talking to lots of other fantastic folks who are publishing books. We are seeing, I think Lamar Giles, when he was here, said we'll know that we need diverse books has succeeded when we see a lot of Black mediocrity. Just books that aren't good, but are being published at the same rate as all the books with white people that aren't good.
Exactly.
All right. How do you feel publishing is doing? Obviously, there's a way to go. Are you seeing the shift that you hope to see, or there's still just a very long road ahead?
I think in some ways it has got, I feel like more people are aware of the problem. And with that awareness comes more people on the ground trying to fix it. I don't think it's going as fast as it could. And I do think that like it's waves and things, because I'll have to double check this. I don't have the exact metric, but I read a report recently that like 2020 was a very banner year for Black bestsellers. And there are a lot of factors that went into that, but it was a year we saw so many Black books hit the bestseller list, mine included. And in 2021, it turns out we actually saw less books by Black authors become bestsellers. And so in an ideal world, we're seeing the number kind of go up and up and up, comparative like to how much of the population is Black and how many Black authors are writing. But we saw it kind of spike and then it's going down again. And so this idea that like change is, it's like, it sometimes feels one step forward, two steps back, but they're still moving forward and people are still fighting, because like we still have to do this fight because it's worth it.
Well, when you're looking around at the world, and obviously just outside of publishing, Um, America's not been doing so hot these past 6-7 years, ever. But certainly it has been very apparent with, well, to say with a racist president has made that a little bit more obvious and blatant, where we couldn't pretend we were somebody that we weren't, as I think some of us were maybe in the habit of doing when we had President Obama for 8 years. So as that becomes more apparent, not just in publishing, but everywhere, what keeps you hopeful, keeps you from getting discouraged, and keeps you writing?
Honestly, for me, it is the young generation and the knowledge that so many of the opportunities and things I have been able to accomplish in my life is because somebody nudged a door open for me, you know? And like, even like, to give an example in my own family, like my mom, at the time when we came to America, she did not have a college degree. She has since been able to get her associate's degree, and I'm so proud of her for that. But she, because education was not something she herself had access to, was so important that like, what then do I do that my daughters can have access to education, have access to resources? And so it's because she was able to do that, I was able to like have access to these books at such a young age, and like be able to get to a point where I can compete in this writing program meant for people older than me, despite being the youngest in my class at the time. And so I'm so aware that the people who made my life possible, I feel this duty that I have to kind of do the same for those coming up. And even if this idea like I can't fix the world, none of us on our own can fix it. But if I can make it a little bit better, a little bit easier for the next person, then that is what I am meant to do, because there's someone who made it a little bit easier for me. And also, I have a lot of hope in Gen Z as well, because as of right now, as we're speaking, the midterm results are still coming up. But like a lot of the races that were ended up going most progressive and with sort of voted in ways that were really sort of how I feel moving society forward, it was Gen Z. Like Gen Z really showed up to the polls, even though there have been years of like, oh, young people don't vote, young people don't vote. But like, no, young people do vote, and they do have a say in what's happening. And now that we're seeing Gen Z come into voting age and like come into like positions of power, we're seeing them that like they have not given up on the country yet, when I feel like a lot of us older folks have. And so seeing that they still believe that this country is fighting for makes me feel like this is work that is still worth doing.
Well said. It was amusing, or has been amusing to me. And again, this will be old news when a esteemed audience is hearing us. But for you and me, it's just happening. I don't know whether to say yay yet or not. That's how close we are in some places. Like, is it good news? It feels like not terrible news. So I'll take that. I'll take that over. But hopefully, it's going to evolve into good news. We'll find out. But what's amusing to me is seeing how consistently all these polling places were wrong, and finding out, oh, you couldn't get anyone under 30 to respond to your polls because you call and they don't answer calls. Of course not. And it's so absurd. I feel like that kind of mirrors one of the problems that I've talked about with a lot of the representatives who've been good enough to come on the show about publishing in general, is that the path to get into publishing is so often you have to be able to afford to live on either no salary or a very minimal salary, working multiple jobs, or you've got generational wealth propping you up, and you don't really even need to work. This is something you're doing for fun. Oh, I think it might be nice to have a career, and you can afford to pay New York rent and be part of the conversation. And then when you know it, you know what really appeals to me, an upper class person writing by other upper class people and other elite folks, and that kind of perpetuates this problem. I'm hoping that what we're seeing is, one, because of COVID, we're seeing more of opportunities for people to be working remotely, people that don't have to be there in the city, don't have to pay some of those things. And we're seeing some of those doors being broken down, not to be put back up, is my hope. I would like to see that future. And I think there's some evidence that there's some of that happening. What do you think?
I think it's definitely like, okay, I mean, this is kind of the same answer I gave before, but it's true. It's happening. It's not as fast as I'd love to see it, but I know, like, as we're speaking right now, tomorrow, November 10th, HarperCollins is actually, they're about to go on an indefinite strike because they've been negotiating for fair wages. The HarperCollins union, I should say, the HarperCollins union is about to go on an indefinite strike. And so by the time your readers are watching this, the strike will hopefully be concluded, because I don't want to think they'll have to go on strike till January, but Like, it's because the workers have come together and realized that like the pay is not sufficient to like you said, living in New York and like the amount of work they're doing. And it's very much a like people on the ground sort of realizing that like if we want publishing to continue and to be representative of the stories we're telling, the people we're telling them for, like something has to change. Because yeah, like you said, it's still such an apprenticeship model. It's still such a like you work all these hours, and then when it's your turn to be the boss, you make the people under you work all these hours unfairly, just because like that's just how we've always done it. And there's people saying it does not have to be like this, and we can change it, but change comes slowly, and oftentimes the people in the highest positions aren't inclined to that change because very few people will give up power willingly, you know? And so it's interesting to see how the power is going to shift. And I'm kind of watching the strike closely to see like how it's going to conclude, and like if the union like can kind of usher in like a new stage of publishing.
Well, fingers crossed. I mean, you were an intern with Entangled Publishing, right?
Yes, I was back when I was in college, actually.
So that I don't know. Maybe we'll cut this out. Was that a paid position or?
That was not. It was an unpaid internship.
Okay. So you were able to use that position to, I'm assuming at some point you learned some tricks about publishing, some tips for the road, because you have had a successful publishing career to date, or maybe that happened completely separate. What was your?
It was definitely a big help because like even though like there was a time I considered like, do I want to be an editor? Do I want to be like, is there a role in publishing I want besides an author? And even though I ended up settling on author, obviously, doing that Entangled internship taught me so much. And also it introduced me to pitch wars, which is how I ended up finding my agent and selling my first book. But yeah, it was definitely like a state of, while I'm grateful I had that internship, there's still a larger conversation. And this is not even just publishing specific. This is many industries. Like the idea, should unpaid internships even exist? And like I was very lucky to be able to take an unpaid internship because I had a paying job and I was like an RA and my room and board was filled. So I had the resources to be able to take an unpaid internship. But this idea of people should not have to do unpaid labor, just period, that's still a lot. That's still a conversation being had. And so, and that kind of goes to the apprenticeship model. Like, yes, I got so much great information, and this is nothing against like the people I was working for at the time, but just the larger question of how many people who would have been just as good in the role as I was, they weren't even possible just because they could not afford to take an unpaid internship on.
So for all the folks out there that we want to see coming right behind you, you want to be making the path for, what things that anyone who's listening to us who's working in publishing could make, what changes could be made to make that path easier for folks?
I think, well, on a corporate level, obviously, like investing more in fair wages for employees, more remote work so that people who aren't in New York or in a coastal area can like be involved in publishing. On a more sort of editorial level, like hiring more diversity, because what we're seeing is experience I know myself and many other marginalized BIPOC authors are having is like our books are being acquired, right? But then we're dealing with publishing teams who don't have sort of any history or sort of the resources necessary to be able to work with us. Like something that many Black authors find happens is with copy editors, right? So many Black authors write in African-American vernacular English, AAVE, which is its own language. It has its own grammatical rules. Like it's not just internet slang. And they will have their stuff copy edited to death, like fix, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes here for y'all listening, quote unquote, fixing the grammar and like making it correct, even though just what is correct is what we call is like, I think there might be a new term for it. Forgive me if I'm forgetting it, but what we consider standard English. Because, and then, so it is another level of edits that we do that many of our counterparts don't have to do, having to then fix those edits and then do it in the language we wrote it in correctly, and then explaining to our team why we did it that way. Like that is just a whole separate edit level then. So that's an extra edit level a Black book has gone through that a book by a non-Black or white author did not have to go through. It's little things, invisible things on the back end like that people don't consider. And of course, edits take time. Like anything we have to do to the book takes time, and it's our job, right? And so it's hurdles like that sort of get in the way and make the process even more difficult when we've already gone through so many hoops to get there. So I'd love to see more publishing houses having more people on the teams from diverse backgrounds and just different cultural backgrounds who can understand these things. And it's not just Black authors too. I've talked to one of my friends, the East Asian author, and she had a similar thing happen to her. She had so many sort of like Korean culturally relevant things in her book that her copy editor like took out or changed because she did not understand them, and she had to take time out to fix it and explain it to this person. And that I feel like is not very fair. And so if they had more people on these teams with more backgrounds, or even just access to more people who had the cultural knowledge and relevancy needed to understand these stories, that would also make the playing field a little more easier for us. So we're not also doing the work of both writing and educating. Because one of the things when you're coming from the majority population, or not even just majority, but the one that has historically been seen as the center, like you don't have to, if your world is based on like England, like you're writing Westeros or something, you don't have to explain how like knights and kings work to the average editor, because that is a cultural understanding that we have, right? But someone who doesn't have that cultural understanding of Ghanaian mythology, I now have to explain that to you. Then you can even be in a place to edit it. So it's just, I don't know. I feel like I rambled there for a second. I don't know if that made any sense.
No, was all interesting. I'm wondering because there is this problem of in the example you gave, literally the copy editor does not speak the language that they need to know to be able to provide that insight. So for somebody else who might be in this situation, is it possible? I know sensitivity readers exist, sensitivity editors exist. Sometimes publishing houses will list their services or hire them. Is it possible to put together your own team and bring them in? Do you have to get to that Rick Riordan level before they let you do that? Or
the thing is, you can, but I feel very strongly we should not have to. I know definitely there are authors who do that because for them, like, it's important enough to do that. But again, because it's like that, it goes to the idea, like another layer that like non-marginalized authors don't have to deal with, you know? And so like, it shouldn't have to be that like we have to assemble the resources for our book to be edited correctly and with the respect it deserves, you know? And so I'd either like the publishing houses to either put together teams, have enough of a diverse base team that they have someone in-house who can do it, or if they don't, they have the resources then, or allocating the resources to get those, to put those teams together on behalf of these books.
I feel like maybe a savvy agent could do that on your behalf. Just put that in the contract. Make sure you have such and such an editor on available for a freelance basis, if nothing else, to make sure we don't have this copy edit problem. Or am I dreaming? Is this my publishing fantasy that can't exist in reality?
I feel like that is again technically an agent could, but again it's that feels like a band-aid over the structural issues that simply like the way the teams are set up are in a way that this cultural, like there's a gap in the cultural knowledge needed to publish books as widely as we want to. And like, it's in line with these publishers' wishes. They want to publish diversity. They want to reach as much of an audience as possible because like for both like art reasons, but also money reasons. These are businesses and a bigger audience means more money. And so because this is what they want, I feel like it is also on their end to also put that, like structure themselves a way to make that possible. So again, like an agent could do that, but again, that still goes, it still puts the problem back on the individual when it's like, I want to see an industry-wide shift in the thinking of how we deal with this.
Hopefully we're going to continue to see that. If we were having this conversation back in, I was at 2016, when we start to see we need diverse books.
I think it was
more of a major move or mainstream movement.
I believe it was 2014 was the year that it was either 2014 or 15 it was founded. But yeah, by 2015 it was really picking up steam.
Gotcha. So if we were looking at that, we would have said, that this seems impossible. We've definitely seen some inroads made. Hopefully, we're going to continue to see that. We're not going to go back. We're going to continue to see progress being made. Ideally, we'll see. Probably will be a lot of, here's a couple of steps, a step forward, here's 2 steps back, here's a step forward, here's 2 steps back. But eventually, hopefully, we'll live in that Lamar Giles dream world of Black mediocrity surrounding us and Asian mediocrity, all the mediocrities surrounding us, and we'll be in good shape.
Ideally, yes. Like a world where like the stories, like that our stories can exist and matter in the way that like we need them to. Yes.
Well, one thing esteemed audience can do if they're listening to this and they're getting fired up and saying, what can I do to help? Well, by God, you can go out there and you can get yourself a copy of SERWA Boateng's Guide to Vampire Hunting. Support these books and let publishers know there's money to be made. There's gold in them hills. Publish these books and the readers are going to come out, right?
Yes, definitely. Also, I feel like we got so into like nerd stuff and all that. I don't think, did I actually talk about SERWA? I don't think I did. I feel like if any of the readers actually want to know about the
You know, that might be one of my roughest segues ever. I don't care. It's a free show, esteemed audience. You're fine. But for esteemed audience who's pulling up the page now and ordering their copy, heading to their local independent bookstores to secure a copy, what do they need to know about the book?
I guess the biggest thing to know is, like I mentioned, the Saturday morning cartoon energy, and it is a book about vampires, but like the vampires here are based in Ghanaian folklore, right? And so if you're thinking Dracula, Edward Cullen, like that's not going to help you. So these creatures are called Ajay, and Ajay is a vampire that can turn into a firefly and it can take over people's minds. And so that means anyone, and you would never know if someone was possessed by one. So like your best friend, your children, your spouse, they could be an Ajay and you would never know. And they'd be sucking people's blood in secret and they'd be causing discord. And so that is the kind of vampire we're dealing with. And that's the world SERWA grew up in, because this is a real creature we have in Ghana. And I found it so fascinating, this idea of like anyone around you can be a monster. And so I really want to explore the idea, when anyone can be a monster, how do you trust anyone? Anyone. Oh my God, let me rephrase that. When anyone can be a monster, how do you trust anyone? And so that is with SERWA, that's something she's learning there, because that is unfortunately in our world as well. The idea that like quote unquote monstrousness is not something you're going to see on the surface. Like the people who have beliefs that could intentionally like directly lead to like the death or just harm to you or your loved ones or your families, like you're not going to know just by looking. And so it was very much fun to explore that using the idea of safe, unsafe, like monsters in the world through the lens of like this creature.
I think that must speak directly to young readers, because without needing to be told, they sense that there are some adults around them that are definitely more dangerous than others. I remember where I was in fourth, fifth grade, the first time I said, oh, that adult meant me harm. That's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I assume, well, I'm sure the world is a much better place now, but there are probably some young people who need to be aware of the monsters around them. When you're talking about themes like that, when you're talking about vampires, you're still writing middle grade. Everybody on the cover's got a weapon. Where's the line between I want to be scary, I want to make sure that we're doing monster hunting justice, but I don't want to go too dark? Where do you find that space?
I think for me, it's an understanding that kids live in the same world we do. Like anything an adult deals with, a kid has / is dealing with. So like things like death, violence, racism, bigotry, bullying, like kids are dealing with all that. So for me, it's never dumbing it down as much as it is simplifying. So like with SERWA, I'm trying to, like, for example, there was one character, her father's been deported. She's a character. And so we're seeing her struggle with that. And so even though the book's obviously not about like immigration laws and all this, like, and we don't go into the exact details of the deportation, we're still seeing the effects on her, because there are kids out there whose families are been broken apart because of deportation. And for me, I knew I didn't want to do any euphemisms like her dad's not around anymore or anything. Like it's just on the page. Like, no, he was taken because he was not allowed to be in the country anymore. And I found young readers really appreciate that frankness, that like, yes, this is happening to you. Yes, this is real. Or even racism in schools, like you mentioned, like realizing that an adult in authority over you means you harm, and how devastating that is, especially a place you're being forced to be at 8 hours a day against your will with people you are being forced to spend time with, and then no one believes you. Like that is a very hard thing to have to deal with. And so realize, like, it's very important to me to speak to young readers and be like, yes, this is actually happening to you and it's traumatizing, and it's not in your head. It's not actually like, you're not imagining this. Because there's a teacher in SERWA who is inspired by a teacher I actually had, who are to this day the worst teacher I've had. And a lot of people reach out to me like, oh my God, Mrs. Dean is so horrible. Like, how could a teacher act like this? And I'm like, I know a teacher can act like this because a teacher treated me and my friends like this.
Do you have you received any kind of confirmation as to whether or not this teacher has read the book or is aware that you're spreading the word if they're evil?
No, because I can say right now, while Mrs. Dean is based off this teacher, that is not that teacher's name. If they've read the book, well, if they realize it's them, I hope they reflect on their lives. But no, I've not read any and I've not looked for it because I have no desire to speak to them ever again.
Well, if they feel some kind of way about it, I don't know, next time try not to suck, you know?
Exactly. Maybe don't be bad.
Try to be less of a jerk in life and less bad things will happen to you. Although in my experience, a lot of times not that I would ever do this, but other authors have told me that if they've written about a character that was villainous in real life or had villain tendencies, they would read the book, never pick up on any of that, and assume, if anything, the hero must have been inspired by them.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever had that happen to me, but that's just because, like, for example, this teacher I had way back when I was still in like public school. So it has been we're getting close to like maybe 10 years since the last time I saw them. So like maybe it's just because the people who inspired this villainy, they're so far removed from my current state of my life that I have just no idea like how they react to it. But I can believe that because I believe it takes a lot of self-awareness to understand when you're harming others, which all of us have the capacity to do. But like, if you lack that self-awareness to see how your actions can cause harm and cause hurt, I doubt you'll ever lack the empathy and just the cognitive work needed to recognize, oh, this is me. Like to quote Taylor Swift, because her album just came out as of our recording, like, I'm the problem, it's me. You need a lot of self-awareness to get there. And I found the very worst people who need that self-awareness never have it.
Or have it too late to really do much benefit. Like in retrospect, there were moments when fifth grade where I was the bad guy. That's not going to do anything for my fellow fifth grade students that I realize this now well beyond. But like, oh, I shouldn't have pulled so-and-so's hair. That was my bad. Doesn't help in the moment, but you do get there eventually. I think everybody, but not everybody would have this moment. It's difficult for me to imagine certain politicians having this moment, but I think most people, if they look back and they're honest with themselves, will sooner or later remember a time when, oh, I could have done that better. I was the bad guy that time.
Definitely, yes. And it's like, I believe it's like you said, like you can't change the past, but like if you can learn from it and move forward and do better, even that is something, you know, even if it's understanding the people I hurt they might never forgive me and they don't have to forgive me, but that does not mean I can't become a better person.
Well, hopefully that's what's happening with this teacher, is they've had a moment of self-reflection. Won't do you any good. You're already out of the school, but might help the future students.
Exactly. Because like, well, I'll be okay if I never get an apology if no other student they have has to go through what I went through.
I mean, apology wouldn't hurt though.
That would not hurt them. It would not.
Right. So is SERWA Boateng, is this going to be the start of a new series, or you have more books planned, or?
Yes, so I just turned in book 2 actually, and the title of that one is SERWA Boateng's Guide to Witchcraft and Mayhem, and I just saw the cover and it is so fun. So I'm working on that, and it's currently 2 books, but all I can say as of right now is the odds of more books are very likely, but if you like it, you want to see more, definitely keep buying it so it becomes even more likely.
Pre-order, why not? Pre-order all day, tell your friends, tell your neighbors. When you're doing that, do you plan your books out ahead of time? Are you plotting and here's how the series is going to be for the arc, or is it just one book at a time, see how it goes?
So for me, the character's emotional arc is king. Like for me, I always sort of plan out the emotional arc I'm going for. Like with SERWA, I knew I was going from this girl who was like, she is trained, like the irony of the fact she is trained to be a vampire hunter. She's traveled all over the world for this, but she's very sheltered because of this. She's not actually spent time with other kids and never made friends. So we're going from her who's had this, she thinks she's very worldly, and then realizing when she's in this average school, just how sheltered and limited her world's actually really been, to her becoming a better, sort of more empathetic person and understanding people better and learning friendship actually is magic. The ponies were right. And so that was that arc that starts in book one. And then of course, with as we're continuing the series, we're seeing that like that is not something just like a single book is gonna teach a person, even if they're 12. And so I know that arc of taking Serwa from this like she's someone who like you have certain characters who kind of start the series like they're low self-esteem, they don't believe in themselves, and like it's very much a journey of like gaining that belief, right? So Serwa, I was starting with someone who believes herself very strongly, believes in her mission, and it's what it's like to have that belief challenged when you're coming from such a strong core like value moral system that is then challenged. And so that journey of what this book one is where we're seeing that first challenge to her belief system happening, and then book two we're going to see the effects of that, and then in future books we're going to see once your value system has been challenged and broken apart, how do you go forward from there? What values do you keep with you? Which ones do you build? Because for me, that was what the story this character needed, and that was what I was fascinated by more than like your traditional like hero learns to believe in themselves kind of arc we see in certain like fantasy books like this.
So do you tend to start with character, find out what's the character's arc, and then worry about the plot and the action and all the stuff that's got to be moved in place?
It kind of depends for me because with Serwat, it actually like it started with the Ajay actually. It started with the vampire because I've discovered this creature when I was researching for my YA series, and I could not fit in my first series, but I love the idea of this mind controlling vampire firefly so much. I was like, I want to write about that one day. So when it came time to start, how I ended up with Rick Riordan Presents was in the ye old days of 2019. It was like August, and I had just come back from my time in Japan. I used to be a teacher in Japan. So I'm back in America. I'm dealing with like culture shock again for the second time in my life. There back in America. And my agent emailed me like, hey, I'm talking to this editor. She's looking for pitches. If you want to pitch or something. I'm like, oh yeah, sure. Why not? Who's the editor? She's like, definitely Rick Riordan Presents. And I'm like, Rick Riordan Presents, because I was an OG Percy Jackson fan. Love, love, love that series. And I had never written middle grade before, but I'm like, if I have a chance to pitch Steph and like Rick, I'm gonna take it. So the vampires came first. And the first pitch I had was actually more National Treasure, like treasure hunting, because I'm a big fan of National Treasure. I love that movie. Very silly and editorial. And my agent was like, okay, not sure how I feel about the treasure hunting, but I'm loving the vampires. Can we maybe hone in on that? And I was like, I can do that. And so from there, I'm like, okay, vampires. The center of the story is the vampires. Who then is the most best character to like hone in on this? And I realized it would be someone who is aware these vampires are real and who lives with this and is trying to deal with it. And then Serwa came from that. And so once I had her, though, like this character who's in opposition to these vampires, then the world and the story came around her. So usually, versus like Wraith, which I talked about earlier in the podcast, where I had that character first who's dealing with mental illness and magic side by side, and then the world came around him. I kind of had this like world base. It wasn't a full world yet, but just like I knew the base of this world needs to revolve around the vampires. And then I had the character, and then everything else came.
And it seems like you must have just a tremendous agent, or she has a tremendous client, some their combination thereof, that you're getting this great IP work, because you've got the Shuri graphic novel, you've got your Star Wars story. I assume you've got other IP that you can't yet talk about that's somewhere in the pipeline.
Definitely. And the interesting thing about some, because like first off, my agent is amazing, but also like the Star Wars one, actually they reached out to me for that one. Like directly, like Jennifer Heddle, she was that editor on that. She literally DM'd me because she saw me come screaming about Star Wars on Twitter, and she's like, hey, we're putting this together, like would you be interested? And I was like, oh, Star Wars, yeah. So it's definitely been like a give and take of like my agent finding opportunities to hear about them, and then also like my platform I built up reaching people in the industry and being like, hey, she might be a good fit for this.
And you're a mega Star Wars fan, right? We were talking all of our love for nerd stuff earlier, but is Star Wars like what's the highest level of, like, for me, the highest level of my nerddom is Batman. I love everything else, but that's the peak for me. Is Star Wars your peak, or what is your peak?
I actually wouldn't say it's my peak because it's weird. I feel like I've known very intensely for Star Wars, but I'm always honest about this. Like, I'm someone who up until like very recently, I had only seen the movies, and I kind of just knew tangentially what was happening in like Clone Wars and some of the shows, right? So like I'm not even as like I loved them so much, but I'm not as deep as like someone who could tell you like on random page of the Obi-Wan Kenobi novel from 2003, what does Qui-Gon Jinn say on page 476? I can't tell you that. But for the peak of my nerddom, that is such an interesting question. For a long time, it was Bat Family, like not even just Batman, but Bat Family specifically, because I love the Robin. I love Jason Todd. I love that. Some other things that would, I'm like looking back here at my shelves because I know books for a long time. Anime, and I am obsessed with anime. I love Naruto, My Hero Academia, Ouran, High School Host Club, Fruits Basket. Like I think anime is a big, big one. I love cartoons. Over the Garden Wall, Steven Universe. Like I'd say like the peak of my nerddom is actually going to be more towards cartoons and anime and books. But I'm just such a big nerd of all of it that it all kind of melts together. But Bat Family is really, really up there just because it meant so much to me when I was young.
That reminds me, I missed my opportunity earlier when we were talking about James Gunn, but Mr. Gunn, I assume you're still listening. Now that you're in charge of DC, give us that Leslie Grace Batgirl movie. I can't wrap my head around there being a Leslie Grace Batgirl movie in existence, and I can't see it. Are you out of your mind? Give it to us.
I feel like the problem is it might be even above James's head because the decision was made by David Z, whose last name, the ZAS, like LAV, him, the new CEO there, and he made that decision before. Well, I don't know when James was brought on, but at least before James was announced he was head of DC. And so, even if James wanted to release it, I don't know if he can.
I mean, I never thought we'd see the Snyder Cut, and we did, and it was worth it. It was such a nice moment of validation for a fan because it was like, oh my god, if it comes out and it's terrible, what have I done with my tweets? What have I done? What have I devoted this much energy to? But then it came out, and it was, oh my god, it was the miracle I hoped it was. Woo! And I feel like that's going to be the case with Batgirl. I have to hope and believe we live in a world where we're going to see Batgirl, and it's going to be everything that I know it should be.
I truly hope because like if there's like a conspiracy theory that this is all a very extended PR stunt so that to like build up hype for Batgirl similar to how hype for the Snyder Cut was built. And I'm like, if this is true, like I try not to follow online conspiracy theories because I think it's a thin line between like fun ones and then actually like dangerous violent ones. But I'm like, if that is true, that is the most convoluted promotion tactic I've ever heard in my entire life.
Well, that might be brilliant since they had to delay Flash since Ezra Miller is being very Ezra Miller anyway. If you know it, I assume they can't do Batgirl since Michael Keaton's continuity won't be explained until Flash comes out. And if you have Michael Keaton back as Batman, you don't cut him out of the movie. Come on. So maybe you might be right. The conspiracy. Oh my God, you have spread a ray of hope to my heart that maybe that is true. That once they get Flash sorted, Batgirl will come out like, okay, fans, you asked for it. You're all going to show up to the theater because you've been demanding it for a year. That you're playing games with my emotions, WB. But okay, I can live in that universe.
Exactly, and it's like it just seems like so much work like for a movie, especially because like Batgirl was straight to HBO Max. It was never going to be in theaters anyway. So like to do all this for a movie that was never going to be in theaters anyway, just if they pulled it off, that would be very impressive from a marketing standpoint. But it also just seems like there's so many ways it can go horribly wrong that I'm like, it's easier for me to believe that they just cut it for money.
Well, I'm watching our time, and it's flown by. It always does. But esteemed audience knows before we get out of here, I can't call it a day without asking you, Roseanne A. Brown, have you ever seen a ghost and or a flying saucer?
I have never seen a ghost and or flying saucer, but two things on that. Number one, when I used to live in Japan, I lived near a place called Hakui, which has this, which is one of the places in the world with the most UFO sightings in the entire world. And they had a museum there, Cosmo Isle Hakui, which is a whole museum dedicated to UFOs, one of the coolest places in the entire world. They had a glow-in-the-dark elevator. I loved it. So I have been to a place with one of the most UFO sightings in the entire world, and it's like in the countryside in Japan. And number two, I have never seen a ghost, but I did have in my house when we first moved in there, my room is right under the door to the attic. And apparently when we first moved in, I was like around 6. And I used to tell my mom all the time, like, Mom, can you please stop going in the attic at night? Like, I'm trying to sleep. And she's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I'm hearing footsteps above me. Someone's walking around the attic. And she's like, I do not go up there. It's only insulation. There's nothing up there. I'm like, well, what am I hearing? And they went up and looked and they found nothing. Nothing was disturbed. And someone could argue I was just hearing creaking from like the wind or something. But I like to believe that I named him Evan. I like to believe Evan was up there just puttering around.
I just read an anecdote on Twitter, and I can't remember the name, so this will be useless to you, esteemed audience. But it was about a woman in the early 1900s who had her secret boyfriend that she was having an affair with living in the attic. Did you see this?
I saw that story. I thought it was wild.
So maybe it's a ghost, maybe it's a secret smuggled person that could be living in your attic for years.
I hope not, because I was right under my room. I would be very upset by that.
One of my favorite things is that they moved, and the husband thought, well, the ghost must have followed us. We're still haunted, because they found a spot in the new attic for this person also. What a what a life. I would read that memoir, My Life at an Attic. But whoa, go on.
It's very gothic, like very Wuthering Heights.
I am so in love with this person that I will cut myself off from the rest of the world and just stay in this attic.
Basically.
Find somebody who loves you like the attic. But no, that's probably terrible advice.
Yeah, no, someone ended up dead. Don't do that.
Well, Roseanne, this has been an absolute privilege and a pleasure. I appreciate Rosie. I appreciate you making the time for us. My final question for you is always some variation of, if you could go back to the start of your career, middle of your career, wherever it would have been useful, and give yourself some advice that would have made easier your path, that might make easier the path of everybody who's watching or listening to us, what would you go back and tell yourself?
I would tell myself, the only thing you can control is the writing. Stop trying to control everything else. Because I look back so much like, oh my God, if I send all these postcards, booksellers will buy my book more. Or if I like make all these Twitter graphics, more people will buy my book. And it's just like I don't want to say that stuff never helps, because it can, but like there was this mindset, like if I just do enough, it'll cause my book to succeed. And like, while my books have had some successes I couldn't even imagine, every sort of major success has been completely out of my control. Like things like Barnes and Noble monthly pig or hitting the New York Times list, all that was stuff that I had nothing to do with. And so I'm at a stage I've accepted that like I can control the book, but I cannot control anything else after that. And when I think about how many those first couple years of my career I wasted, like just being like, I need to do more. And it got to the point where I was letting the book suffer, because I was so like the thing about books is, by the time a book is coming out, we have been done with it for like close to a year. So we're already in the next book, right? So even right now, it's like SERWA just came out as when we're talking like 2 months ago. But I am still very deeply in book 2. Like, and I'm happy to do things talking about SERWA, going to festivals and stuff. But like the majority of my brain space is dedicated to book 2. Because I learned this because the mistake I sort of made with my first series is when my brain space should have been focused on book 2, I was still so focused on book 1 and like, what can I do to make it a bigger success and reach more people, blah, 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 blah. And then the quality of book 2 was suffering, which is why it took me a little longer to edit it. So now I'm like, focus on what you can control, put your brain space where it needs to be. And once the book is done and it's out, it's going to do what it's going to do. And it's the next book needs you more than the book that is out, which sounds wild to audiences because like you're seeing an author promote the book that just came out. But on an artist creative level, your head needs to be in the next project.
I think that is the perfect note to end on. Where can esteemed audience find you online, follow you on social media and all that good stuff?
So I'm currently most active as of right now, November. Twitter, who knows, well, that will be in January, but on Twitter, I'm at Rosie's Ramble. That's ROSIES Ramble, like possessive Rosies. Please don't tweet at Rosie Rambles. That is not me. I don't think she likes it. And that is the same handle on Instagram as well. I'm also currently moving to Tumblr a lot, which I'm saying moving, it's more like coming back, because Tumblr was my teenage haunt back in the early 2010s. I'm roseanneabrown.tumblr.com over there. So those are probably the 3 I'm going to be most active on.
Don't bother following me on Twitter, esteemed audience. I was never that active on there. And now that it appears to be going right down the Elon Musk tube, that's it. It's fine. Do follow Middle Grade Ninja. Head there for interviews almost as good as this one with agents, authors, book people. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. It will change your life. And God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.